So on behalf of the Dean of the Divinity School's office and my course, which is taught here in the Divinity School, called Religious Dimensions in Human Experience, I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's event, a one-man show with Walt Michael called Of These Hollers I Sing. I like Pablo Neruda's take on poetry, the dual dimension of poetry, because what he says about poetry is so applicable to education and music. Neruda said, "My poetry is guided by the twin stars of lucha y esperanza, struggle and hope," in order to make his poetry what he called a useful working instrument. He said, on the one hand, he thought that poetry should be about beauty, symmetry, and high romance. But he said, on the other hand, the poetry that he wanted to write should be tied to the everyday lives and loves and struggles of all kinds of people, so that it could become a useful working instrument. And so it is with Walt Michael and his 40-year education, playing, and teaching, and organizing folk traditions, and being a leader in the folk music movement. You will perhaps want to know that Walt and I went to school together. We not only went to school together, we went to church together, because Walt's father was a minister in the church that I went to when I was a child. As a matter of fact, his father baptized me. And my father taught Sunday school in his father's church. So you could say that this is really all about the good old Methodist church. Now, out of that Methodist church came a lifelong friendship and relationship. As a matter of fact, Walt and I went to college, the same college, Western Maryland College. And just the year before we got there, a visiting speaker to the college challenged all the students at this college, Western Maryland College, by calling them the apathetic generation. And as a result of being called the apathetic generation, a number of students at this school formed an organization called the Student Opportunity Service. And a number of students became very responsive and involved in the summers. Instead of going to the beach or going to other places on vacation, they went and worked in communities of real need. I went to Puerto Rico every summer that I was in college to work with sugarcane companies, sugarcane workers in the sugarcane fields. And Walt went to Appalachia. I met some amazing people in Puerto Rico. One person became very close to me, a guy named Tito Cruz. And Walt, when he went to Appalachia and began to live up in the coal fields and the Hollers, he became very close to someone you'll hear about tonight, a man named Christian Bailey, a great mountain picker. And this led to a lifelong now career for Walt in developing awareness of playing, performing music that is in some way rooted in the Appalachian world. Before that, Walt Michael, who was born in Bethesda, Maryland, was a U.S. Supreme Court page from 1960 to 1963 during the tenure of the Warren Court and the Kennedy administration. He attended the Capitol Page School in the Library of Congress with Senate and House pages, encountering many of the cultural and political icons of the day, from President John Kennedy to Attorney General Robert Kennedy to Carl Sandburg to the Mercury astronauts, all as a teenager. His father, Reverend Marion Michael, worked in the Methodist building across from the Supreme Court, and as a young district superintendent was a key figure in facilitating the racial integration of the Methodist Church in the Washington metropolitan area. So father and son, Marion and Walt, shared many formative experiences during that time. When Walt came to Western Maryland College, he led the student newspaper. As a matter of fact, the truth is, I was the editor of the student newspaper. And when I left, I had to choose somebody to follow me, and he was a year behind me, so I said, man, you're going to be the student newspaper editor. And there he won a number of awards. And then he spent these summers in the Appalachian Hills, and he participated in student exchange programs and voter registration drives in the Deep South. Because of what he learned in the Appalachian Hills, his guitar and banjo went with him everywhere, from the coal fields of West Virginia to the back roads of rural South Carolina. In the fall of 1968, after much soul-searching and deliberation, Walt refused the Western Maryland College ROTC commission and filed with the Selective Service Administration as a conscientious objector. He taught adult education with the Board for Fundamental Education at Bethlehem Steel for a year, and in 1969 enrolled in the Drew Theological Seminary in Madison, New Jersey. It was there that he found his vocation as a champion of an artist within the folk music revival movement. He sailed on Pete Seeger's sloop, Clearwater, along the Hudson River, and performed with civil rights activist Reverend Fred Kirkpatrick in New York City. In 1971, he formed Bottle Hill, a bluegrass band that toured extensively in the Northeastern Canada. His various musical incarnations, including Bottle Hill, Michael McCreashan Campbell, and Walt Michael and Company, have taken him from the coal camps of Appalachia to the closing ceremonies of the 13th Olympic Winter Games to the White House. He's recorded 9 albums, some of which are here, appeared at the Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center, and toured in the U.S., Canada, Europe, and the U.K. His music has been heard on ABC TV, The Tonight Show, Broadway, PBS. He's considered a virtuoso of tremendous influence of the revival of the hammered dulcimer, which he has brought up here from his home in Westminster, Maryland. His wide repertoire ranges from old-time Southern Appalachian to Celtic, to folk, to original compositions. Now, in 1994, he returned to this college that we went to, and he became the artist in residence at this college. And what he did is he has created an amazing organization called Common Ground on the Hill. And Common Ground on the Hill is a year-round series of presentations, lectures, musical events reflecting folk music from all over the world. But every summer there is a 2-week camp, and this is the 15th anniversary of this 2-week camp that takes place. I go every summer, where people come to learn and teach all kinds of music, all kinds of dancing, all kinds of singing, modes of singing, and it also has a strong social justice element to it. We want to make sure you know about Common Ground on the Hill, because it's a tremendous opportunity for people to learn and to teach and to enjoy what I call politics you can dance to. You know, Pete Seeger comes, a number of other tremendous singers and players come and are part of this. He's come here tonight to share with us this notion of these hollers I sing. Now, my course, where there's a number of students here tonight in the course, one of the things we're studying in the class is sacred space and sacred place. And we're looking at the ways that people orient themselves in places that they struggle, live, and love in. And in a sense, tonight, even though we're not doing Appalachia in the course, this is very much about the notion of sacred place and sacred space, only it's the hollers that are sacred. And the hollers are sacred to the people that live there, the people that made music there, and certainly to Walt Michael. And so please welcome Walt Michael, who's going to take us through these hollers that I sing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Davíd. I'm not sure I recognize the guy that you just introduced. How many of you have ever studied Appalachia in any of your coursework anywhere at any time? Raise them high. Tonight we're going to talk about forgotten people. Rednecks, African Americans. We're going to talk about Italian immigrants, Native Americans, these people whose mountains are now being destroyed. How many of you have heard about mountaintop removal? Good. For those of you who haven't, did you get anything out of tonight? What I'm asking you to do is to go home and Google mountaintop removal and become aware of what's going on. So, Appalachia. Some people call it Appalachia. We called it Appalachia when we were there, and then somehow it got to be Appalachia. Either way you say it's going to be all right depending on where you are in Appalachia. You look like singers to me. We have singers here?
Yeah, we got some singers. You should hear them singing like that.
Good. Because I have a sing-along rule. The way it works is if you don't sing on the chorus, I make up another verse. So you can see it becomes worthwhile to get involved quickly because I'm not a good songwriter. I can sing okay. This is a song that really defines what being in Appalachia is all about. And this is how I got hooked. It's called Hello Stranger. It was a big hit by the Carter family. You've heard of June Carter Cash? Right? Johnny Cash? Well, the Carter family was the most popular radio group in the world. The Simple Mountain Folks. And this is one of their songs. It's called Hello Stranger. Hello Stranger, put your loving hand in mine. Hello Stranger, put your loving hand in mine. You are a stranger, but you're a friend of mine. That's the chorus. Let's get on it now. Hello stranger, put your loving hand. Put your loving hand in mine. Hello stranger, put your loving hand in mine. You are a stranger, but you're a friend of mine. Weeping like a willow and mourning like a dove. Weeping like a willow and mourning like a dove. You are a stranger, hey, but you're the one I love. Here we go. Hello, stranger, put your loving hand in mine. Hello, stranger, you are a stranger, you're a friend of mine. I'll see you when your troubles are like mine. I'll see you when your troubles are like mine. Yeah, I'll see you when you've been rambling all the time. Last chance. Hello, stranger, it's all you. Good. Put your loving hand in mine. You are a stranger, but you're a friend of mine. I said you are a stranger, but you're a friend of mine. Good singing. All right. Give yourselves a hand. That's great. Yeah. Great. Well, we're going to do more of that as the night moves on. Davíd told you about the Student Opportunity Service. You couldn't do now what we did then. We collected 5,000 books. During the school year, we went around, raised money from civic organizations, and then we got in our instance, we got in a Volkswagen Bug and a U-Haul rental van and drove those books down into West Virginia. And the reason I say you couldn't do it now is because we didn't have insurance, you know. I mean, the parents were fine with it, you know. There was going to be no litigation. We just went. So while Davíd was in Puerto Rico, we headed down into the mountains. And I want to tell you about our first night. Actually, our first night was in Welch, West Virginia, and we met with the Council of Southern Mountains. It was a government agency there in McDowell County. And they said, now tomorrow we're going to hook you up with this guy named Chick Lockhart. And Chick's a school principal. He's a community guy. He's going to take you around to your houses. You're going to stay in different homes, and it'll be fine. There's some places you shouldn't go. Things can get violent. You want to stick together. Have a good time. Go at it. 6 weeks. So we took a ride, and I was there in my little Volkswagen, which is like, you have to imagine a Volkswagen into Appalachia in 1965 was like driving a Volkswagen into South Carolina doing voter registration in 1966 with New Jersey tags. So in any event, we drove in, and we first stopped at the home of Roland and Anna Bailey. And Chick said, "This is going to be your house." Now, Mrs. Bailey had just been at a funeral, and she was mourning. Mr. Bailey wasn't home. And he said, "Anna, this is Walt Michael. He's going to stay at your place. You know, remember we talked about that?" And she said, "No. I'm not going to put him up. No, he can't stay here." So we got back in our cars, and we dropped Casey Henson off in Mohawk, West Virginia. She stayed at a nice home there. It was attached to a community store. And then we dropped my buddy Will and my friend Dan off at a coal miner's home, Woodrow Klein. And I was instantly jealous because Woodrow said, "Hey, you boys like to fish?" And he was a great outdoorsman and a wonderful man. And that's where my friend Will was going to be. You know? And then we drove Jan and Linda all the way to the top of Johnny Cake Mountain to the very humble abode of the Blankenships. And they greeted them warmly. Then Chick Lockhart turned to me and he said, "Now, Walt, you just get in your car and ride back there to the Baileys. You can stay there tonight." I said, "Well, they don't want me." He said, "It'll be fine. Just go on. Just drive on back." Well, first of all, I had to figure out how to get back there. And night was falling. And it was quite a drive. So I pulled up in front of the Bailey's home. I found my way back. And Mr. Bailey was home by then. And they had a general store and these railroad tracks. And then this home down below the railroad tracks. And then there's the Tug River. We'll be hearing a lot about the Tug River tonight. And I said, "Mr. Bailey, my name's Walt Michael, and I feel very embarrassed to ask you this, but Chick Lockhart said I'm supposed to stay with you all, and I know it's an imposition, and I have nowhere else to go tonight. I'm just wondering if I could, sleep in my car here in your driveway or whatever." And he said, "Oh, that's all right. You can stay here. You can stay here tonight." Okay. So he said, "You like TV dinner?" TV dinner in Appalachia wasn't working for me. I said, "Yeah, sure." So he went into their store, grabbed a TV dinner, and off we went into the basement of the Bailey's house. The Bailey's home lay between the tracks of the N&W Railroad and the Tug River, the East Fork of the Tug River. The unfinished basement was where the family lived, ate, and relaxed. I sat at the Formica kitchen table and made conversation. I learned that Roland was a private, small coal operator. He employed about 6 men mining coal in drift mines that drift into the side of the mountain. They're carved out of the mountains with sweat, dynamite, and small machinery. Private coal truck operators transported the coal from Roland's mine to railroad tipples, where coal cars were filled with the black gold. At least twice a day, the N&W Railroad pulled 150 or more coal cars right past the Bailey store, en route to steel mills, electric plants, and other major industries throughout the nation, which were fueling the war in Vietnam. A myriad of mining operations, big and small, supplied the trains with this prehistoric cargo. Roland told me that 200 years' worth of coal remained in the mountains around us. I wondered why so much poverty existed in the midst of such vast natural wealth. Well, there's a song about that we can do. You ready to sing again? How do people survive? How does that work for them? Well, I'll have to figure out what key we're in here. That's it. This is a song called Farther Along, and I found out recently it's also in the African American tradition. A lot of music in the Appalachian and Southern white tradition mixed during the great revivals with the music that the African Americans were singing. And this is a song that sort of addresses that, how you cope. See what you think about it. Farther along, we'll know more about it. I've got to get in a different key. Oral tradition, help me out here. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Try it. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along. Farther along, we'll understand why. Cheer up. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Tempted and tried, we're off made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long. While there are others living in splendor, they go unmolested, though in the wrong. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Sisters, cheer up, my sisters, sing in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has found and taken our loved ones, leaving our home so lonely and drear, then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brothers, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. We'll understand it all by and by. So, somewhere down the road, we'll understand it. Somewhere down the road, we may get some justice. Farther along. As we talked in the basement, an explosion from outside rocked the house. Shaken, I asked what had happened. Roland calmly and slowly replied, "Just some fellers playing around with dynamite, I reckon." He returned to our conversation. 20 minutes later, there was a slow knock on the basement door, and an old man poked his head in and said, "Roland, there's a man dead up on the railroad tracks." We rushed out of the basement and scrambled up the bank onto the tracks. 100 yards down the tracks, a demolished car lay upside down. The driver had put a stick of dynamite under his belt, lit a slow-burning cigarette fuse, and gone for a drive. It was said that he and his wife were having difficulties and that he was depressed. The car passed the Bailey store, rounded the bend, and climbed the mountain above the tracks where the dynamite exploded, blowing the man in two and hurling him inside his car and the car off the mountainside and onto the tracks below. Soon it seemed that the entire community gathered in the night. Teenage boys spit tobacco and smoked cigarettes that had been blown out of the car onto the road. Violence and death hung heavy in the damp air. It was my first night in the mountains. During that first summer, we experienced the cultural wealth of the Appalachian people. Although mired in poverty, they were people with profoundly deep roots, reaching way back to a time before the lumbering and mining industries had decimated their land. These roots continue to sustain the mountain folk after the plundering. My richest experience in the mountains centered on its traditional music. As soon as the library was in place, we wanted to have a gala opening and thought that a hootenanny, if you'll excuse me. How many of you have heard of a hootenanny? Probably your grandparents told you about it, right? Hootenanny was basically a sing, and it was the word of the day, the term of the day for getting together and playing some folk music. We thought a hootenanny would be a fun activity for the community and an opportunity to help organize the community into a year-round support system for the library and the community center. After all, we brought these books down and we wanted to see this thing succeed. So we needed to bring the community together. Fellow volunteer Linda Sullivan and I would play our guitars and banjos, but we thought it most important to find some local folks who could play music as well. We heard that Zink Bailey on Bull Creek. Can you get those names? Zink Bailey on Bull Creek was a fine mandolin player who had played on radio shows. Now, in those days, if you played on the radio, that meant you were it. You could really play. So we drove to his store and we introduced ourselves. Zink was a really friendly guy and a humble man, but he told us that he'd be driving his coal truck that evening and couldn't play music for us. We were disappointed because we'd heard he was so good and it would be just a coup to get him there. But as we turned to leave the store, a short, stooped old man winked at me and asked if I picked the banjo. I replied, yes, whereupon he asked if I would like to see his banjos. That's Bull Creek for banjo. I could hardly contain myself, for I knew that I had hit the jackpot. I had found what I had hoped to find in these mountains, roots music inextricably linked to the rich past of the oral tradition. This old man was William Christian Bailey, the older brother of Zink Bailey. We climbed the hill to his home, and he showed me into his living room where hung 7 or more handmade fretless banjos. They were relatively crude instruments in appearance, made of oak, maple, and cherry woods, and fox, squirrel, and groundhog skins. Christian took one from the wall, walked to the front porch, and commenced tuning the banjo while he introduced me to his mother, who was 89 years old. I learned a number of things from her immediately, and one of the first things she told me was that she had witnessed the hanging of famous outlaw John Hardy in Welch many, many years before when she was a young girl. She had seen John Hardy hang. Christian's mother was born on this very spot back before the timber and coal industries had ravaged the land. She remembered the great canopied forest before its mammoth trees were clear-cut and floated downriver. She remembered Bull Creek when it ran clear. Christian brought his banjo into tune and played an old modal tune, his instrumental version of John Hardy. I recorded him in those years, and these recordings are with the Library of Congress, and I'll play this for you now. This is Christian Bailey playing an instrumental version, a very primitive version of John Hardy, the ballad that had been composed for the event that his mother had seen.
This is a song of Johnny Hardy.
It went on. John Hardy. John Hardy was over 6 feet tall, weighed about 220 pounds, raw-boned, and had unusually long arms. He came originally from down in eastern Virginia and had no family. He was a legendary steel driver right along John Henry. This is the area where you've heard of John Henry. These people existed. They were real people. He was about 40 years old when he met his demise. The following statement was made in the summer of 1918 by Mr. James Knox Smith, an African-American lawyer of Keystone, McDowell County, West Virginia, who was present at the trial and also at the execution of John Hardy. John Hardy, colored, killed another Negro over a crap game at Shawnee Camp. The Shawnee Coal Company was and is located there. Hardy was tried and convicted in the July term of the McDowell County Criminal Court and was hanged near the courthouse on January 19, 1894. While in jail, he composed a song entitled John Hardy and sung it on the scaffold before the execution. He was baptized the day before the execution. While in jail after his conviction, he could look out and see the men building his scaffold, and he walked up and down his cell telling the rest of the prisoners that he would never be hung on that scaffold. Hardy began to sing and pray and finally sent for the Reverend Lex Evans, a white Baptist preacher, told him he had made his peace with God, and he asked to be baptized. Then they let him put on a new suit of clothes. The guards led him down to the Tug River, and Evans baptized him. On the scaffold, he begged the sheriff's pardon for the way he had treated him. Said that he had intended to fight to the death and not be hung, but that after he got religion, he did not feel like fighting. He confessed that he'd done wrong, killed a man under the influence of whiskey, and advised all young men to avoid gambling and drink. A great throng witnessed the hanging, and among them was Christian's mother. This was the first of many visits to Christian's home. In fact, I ended up living there. I moved out of the Bailey's house the next year and stayed at Christian Bailey's house, which was quite a difference, as you can imagine. I listened to stories of the Union Wars and the Baldwin thugs. How many of you have seen the movie Matewan? You know about that movie? You might want to look at that movie. Matewan. It's about the Union Wars in the 1920s. Christian Bailey was a minstrel to the Baldwin thugs, the hired guns who made sure that people didn't join the unions, and if they did, they were taken out. A minstrel to the Baldwin thugs. Moonshining. He loved to tell stories about moonshining. In jail, where he learned to read and write. And adventures of local hero Matt Justice. What a great name. This guy was a bad guy, and his name was Matt Justice. Legendary. And as they said, he's the nicest man you'll ever want to meet unless you cross him. And if you cross him... Over the next 2 years, Christian sang ballads dating back to the 18th century in England and played banjo tunes of antiquity. Joe Hickerson of the Library of Congress provided me with reel-to-reel tapes upon which I recorded Christian's music and stories, and those recordings are now in the Library of Congress. I'd like to sing one of those songs for you. And it was really hard to get this song because Christian very rarely sang. In fact, it's the only song he ever sang. He played, but he didn't sing much. And one day he just came out with this song. And this song is a broadside ballad. Broadsides were ballads that were sold on the streets dating back into the 16th century in England. Before they printed any kind of periodicals or books, they printed these broadsides, and they would sell them on the streets, and they were songs that made it into the more classical ballad realm of singing. It's called Dear Johnny, or Green Beds. It has a good story. What look have you, dear John? It's very bad, said he. What look have you, dear John? It's very bad, said he. I lost my ship and cargo on the raging sea. Bring down your daughter Polly and set her on my knee. Bring down your daughter Polly and set her on my knee. We'll drown the melancholy and wedded we will be. My daughter's not at home, John, she won't see you today. My daughter's not at home, John, she won't see you today. And if she were at home, John, she'd drive you away. Johnny looked upon the young, and he looked upon the old. Johnny looked upon the young, he looked upon the old, and he jumped out 2 fists full of gold. And the father said, I was just a joking, John. I was just a speaking jest. I was just a joking, John. I was just a speaking jest. For all exceptions, John, she loves you the best. Well, down comes Polly with a smile on her face. Well, down comes Polly with a smile on her face. She hugs John, she kissed John, and John he did embrace. She said, the green bed is empty, John, and you can sleep with me. The green bed is empty, John, and you can sleep with me. We'll drown the melancholy, and wedded we will be. Johnny went around the mountain, his lodging for to seek. Johnny went around the mountain, his lodging for to seek. Before I'd lie in your bed, I'd lie out in the street. He just went down and laid down in the road and wouldn't marry that girl. That's the way I heard it. Some ignorant old man in the mountains singing a ballad 300 years old. In the fall of 1968, fellow volunteer Jeff Davis arranged for Christian Bailey to come to Western Maryland College and spend a few weeks on campus. We had this idea. We're going to bring this guy to the college campus. Playing banjo and telling stories. It was by far the furthest Christian had ever been out of the mountains. Christian's mother had passed away the prior spring, and he had been very depressed. I'd like to read you the letter that Christian sent me after that time. Dear Mr. Walt, I thought I'd drop you and all of your buddies a few lines to let you know I miss you awful bad. I'm crying now, studying about my dear mother, but she's in a better place than me. I miss her so bad. I cry almost all the time. I did not know how I'd miss her till now. I was lying in my bed the night she was buried and was studying about her and praying to hear her sweet voice one more time. And I heard her going on, and I thought she was calling on me for to come to her, and I jumped up and run over, and nobody I could see. And I knelt down by my bed and prayed to hear her sweet voice again. And Zink and his wife come over, and I kept on praying for to see her and talk with her. And Zink stayed with me 1 hour and told me to pray on, and it was 11 o'clock, and I went to bed, and I just couldn't rest, and knelt down by my bed and went to praying for her to come and let me kiss her sweet lips one more time. And something eased my mind. I prayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning. I was going to try and meet her in heaven on the sweet by and by, so I know if I meet her, I will have to change my ways. Say, you all come and do what I told you and bring that gas stove and tape recorder and movie projector, and we will have a good time. All of my people like to see you all coming. I brag on you all to everyone I see. You all just seem like the family has come home. Come and make yourselves right at home and stay as long as you want. It won't cost nothing to stay with me. Make it your headquarters right here anytime you come. I'm longing to see you all coming. You try and bring me a good girlfriend with you that would be real company to me. Well, I guess I better close with all of my love to all of you and your girlfriends. Try to bring 3 or 4 girls with you. Answer real soon. Don't put it off so long writing. Tell your daddy and mother I'd love to see them coming. I would hug their necks. Well, be sure and let me know when you're coming. From your best friend, William Christian Bailey, Route 3, Box 444, Mohawk, West Virginia. April 26, 1968. Christian's coming to the college. We were concerned that if given the chance, he would drink and go into an alcoholic tailspin, as he had done in the past. But the thinking was that Jeff could control Christian's environment during the visit, and things would go well. After all, Christian had never been to a town of this size and wouldn't know where to go to find liquor, and he had no mode of transportation. On the second morning of Christian's visit, Jeff told Christian to stay put while he left his apartment and went to class. When he returned, he found Christian drunk in the midst of a number of wine bottles. This old mountain man had merely called a cab company and asked to be taken to the nearest liquor store. Jeff called me in Baltimore, where I was teaching, and asked for my help. I drove Christian back to Bull Creek throughout that night, arriving at dawn. He was in very sad shape. We did not know how deeply he was possessed by alcohol and how sick he was. Some weeks later, we drove once again to Bull Creek to attend a funeral. Christian had put an end to his despair with a self-inflicted gunshot. We had a floral arrangement made up in the fashion of a banjo. We lost a real friend. In a sense, I lost the most tangible human element of my entire student volunteer experience. In the spring of 2000, 34 years after my first trip to Appalachia, I returned to the Hollers with Don and Ellen Elms, who were volunteers who actually stayed in the mountains. They returned there. They've been there ever since. And 5 of my McDaniel students, Western Maryland College students. We visited Roland and Anna Bailey and then drove to Bull Creek, where I was delighted to find Zink Bailey. We sat on his front porch and played music for the first time in over 30 years. We played together better than ever before. 8 years later, in the fall of 2008, just last fall, a year ago, our Southern Appalachia Interdisciplinary Course made a pilgrimage back to Appalachia. We played and danced at the Carter Family Fold, the birthplace of country music. We learned of the demise of the once vibrant town of Grundy, bulldozed into oblivion as it now sits in the path of runoff from the vast mountaintop removal site lurking above the town. With Don and Ellen Elms, we drove the winding Jewel Ridge, then dropped down into the hollers of West Virginia past Jolo, where folks still handle copperheads and rattlesnakes in church services. Through Bradshaw, Beartown, Garland, and Yeager, where we met up with Anna and Roland Bailey, who, by the way, were the local supplier of Obama bumper stickers during the last election. Obama won in this godforsaken part of our country. Not since JFK have these mountain folks felt welcome at our nation's table. Anna and Roland joined us as our car caravan drove along the Tug Fork River and the Annandale Railroad tracks, up the mountain over Panther Creek Road and down into Bull Creek, where we were to meet Zink and Myrtle Bailey after they finished church services right there in their little holler community. We were going to play music and visit with Zink and Myrtle, both now almost 90 years old, treating our students to the timeless heart of the Appalachian experience. As we approached Zink's home, the very place of Christian Bailey's suicide 40 years before, Zink's grandsons walked toward us crying and said, "There's been a tragedy here today. Zink's daughter committed suicide just an hour ago." I looked across the road and saw an emergency vehicle parked in the driveway. Zink's daughter was one of the kids we had led as student volunteers 40 years before. We taught her to swim. We were in a timeless place, a timeless, ongoing tragedy of poverty, isolation, and violence. Zink says he still wants to see you all. So please come in. Instruments already in hand, although now seeming totally inappropriate, we entered the grief-stricken house. Myrtle sat keening and rocking as Zink wept silently in his chair. I knelt in front of Myrtle. She took my face in her hands and asked if I was a Christian. This was no time for theological semantics. I assured her that I was, and she said as she keened in the wake of her daughter's suicide, "God is so good to us." For over an hour we talked and grieved with the Baileys. As we started to leave, wanting the family to have its privacy, Zink said, "Walt, Rob, please play some music for us. By this time, a number of family members were in the house. Before we played, I managed to say, I do not believe that it is by chance that we are here together in this moment. Our friendships had weathered the years and brought us together in the midst of this incomprehensible moment. A moment when these voices from the margins would reach out in song. We sang Angel Band, Will the Circle Be Unbroken, and played the Shaker melody, Simple Gifts. When we had finished, something wonderful happened. 3 of the family members, the daughter of and 2 nephews of this woman, they sang for us. They sang for us a stunningly intricate and beautifully harmonied version of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. This in the midst of their grief. Music had transformed this living room in this dark holler on Bull Creek. As we walked to our cars, I turned to our students and said, "Welcome to Appalachia." Is it a wonder that we've never studied about it? Do we owe these people? Or we just let them be bulldozed? When will we stop calling them rednecks? I'd like to play another recording for you of another wonderful musician I met. His name is Alex Klein. Alec, we called him. He was less than 5 feet tall. He had these deer-like eyes that were always watering. And he was missing this finger. And he played the harmonica. And when he played the harmonica, it appeared that he was swallowing one of his fingers because you couldn't see it. But indeed, it was missing. And he was just this joyful guy, and he pulled a wagon around and would just do chores for people up and down the Hollers. And he expressed joy in everything he did. I have a recording of him playing the harmonica, and he's going to play Fox Chase. Everybody, the mark of a good harmonica player is someone who can play a fox chase, and what he does is imitate the dogs, and probably not the fox. And we'll see how we do here. Let's make sure. Yeah. He's my favorite harmonica player of all time. Alec Klein. see, in the midst of the grief, there's a whole lot of fun that we have. What I'd like to do with you now is to sing some of the songs we played with the Baileys. Since you're all such good singers, it's so rare to find people who will sing with you. But you're a theological school, right? A lot of you have probably seen this instrument. I like to say, if you want to get your children to leave home, take up the auto harp. Also, for those of you, I don't know how many of you have little kids, but you know how hard it is to control children in the store? You know, how they throw fits and stuff? Well, I found out that if I threatened my daughter with clog dancing, she would straighten right up. Until she got to be about 17, then she started clog dancing. This song is one I first heard in church in West Virginia. I love this song. It's one we sang with the Baileys there. It's called Angel Band. Sun is sinking fast. My race is nearly run. My strongest trials now are past. My triumph has begun. This is the chorus. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Try it. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me. Bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Again, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. I must be near the resting place of friends and kindred dear. I've brushed the dew on Jordan's banks. The crossing must be near. Here we go. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. I've almost gained my heavenly home. My spirit loudly sings. The holy ones, behold, they come. I hear the noise of wings. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. I'll bear my longing heart to Him who bled and died for me, whose blood now cleanses from all sin and gives me victory. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Bear me away on your snow-white wings to my immortal home. Bear me away on your snow-white wings to my immortal home. Yeah. The singing in the mountains, I'll never forget it. Some of the singing, depending on which church you went to, we went to a lot of them, and they always looked at us like we were sinners. And we were. Let's make no bones about it. We were 20 years old. And but there was one church we went where they lined out the hymns. You know what that is, where you'd sing a line, sort of like what we've been doing tonight, sing a line and then it's repeated. And this church, it was the most mournful, bluesy, wonderful singing I've ever heard. And they were outside and singing and projecting their voices across to the next mountainside. And this just reverberated down the mountains. No wonder that these people never want to leave the mountains. What could be better, no matter how poor? Many of these people would go to Chicago and work for 6 months just so they could save enough money to live in a shack for 6 months in the mountains. The mountains that are disappearing now. 60% fewer people live there now than did when we were volunteers. The culture is riddled with prescription drugs. OxyContin is the rule of the day. Things are in tough shape in the mountains. And yet this spirit lives on. I'd like to close with by playing a tune on the hammer dulcimer here, which this style comes from Scotland, same roots as these people. But it comes originally from the Middle East. It comes from Persia, from Iran. There it's known as a santur. Here it's known as the hammered dulcimer. And I'll see if I can move it over here and play a tune. I played this tune for Myrtle and Zink. It's a tune that I learned in Shetland. And it's called Da Slaket Light. Anyone here ever been to Shetland? Go. 98% of the people play music in Shetland. And when you play in Shetland, there are people of all ages, from little babies, wee bairns, to the old folk. It's a really great culture. And they love their music, and they love your music. They love any kind of music. And there was a fellow named Tom Anderson who was a fiddler, and he retired from the insurance industry and spent his next 20 years teaching the children of Shetland the fiddle, because the traditions were dying out. A lot of kids were opting to leave the island and go to the mainland and study and work. And he knew he had to help preserve the tradition. So he did. He taught the kids. And when we went to the Shetland Folk Festival, we played his tune. Now, he had passed away 6 months before we arrived, and we played this tune in his honor. And when we played it, the audience stood. Now, that happens to us a lot. People stand, and then they turn, and they walk out. But in this instance, they stood, and we realized we were in a special place where people are so tuned into their traditions and their music that someone coming from outside and playing one of their pieces would merit them standing. So we played this tune, but what we didn't realize is that this was the tune that Tom Anderson had asked his students to play at his funeral. So this tune had all this power that we didn't know until then. Tom Anderson wrote this for his wife. It's called Das Locket Light, the light which has gone out. As a result of playing this tune, we ended up bringing the children, Shetland's Young Heritage Fiddlers, with us, and we did a month-long tour of the United States, including the White House, and we called it the Dream Tour. We fulfilled Tom Anderson's dream of having his students come to America and show us what could be done with young people. So we'll end with this. I hope I do it justice. It's called Das Locket Light. These tunes are played out of time sometimes to sit with the melody and be with it for a while. And I'd like to do this for Ira Zepp. for listening. Thank you very much. That's good. Take up time. Thank you.
So I've just persuaded Walt to play one more song for us, a banjo, because he bought the banjo, but he didn't play the banjo. Is that a good idea? Yeah. Play the banjo, please. Yeah. I mean, just play the banjo for us, will you,
I'll play the banjo. Well, okay. Well, wouldn't be right without doing one good murder ballad. So I'll do a murder ballad. Back in the day, you had a culture that didn't read one. Before there weren't any newspapers anyway. How did you find out about stuff happening? Well, ballads preserved a lot and carried the word around. This is a song called Little Sadie. Went out one night, I had a little brown, saw darling Sadie and I shot her down. I went back home, I got into bed, a 44 smokeless laying under my head. Then I got to thinking about the deed I'd done. I grabbed my hat and away I run. I gave a good run, I run too slow. They overtook me in Jericho. I was standing on the corner reading a bill. Went up and stepped the sheriff of Thomasville. He said, "Hey boy, ain't your name Brown? Remember the night you shot Sadie down?" I said, "Yes sir, my name is Lee. I murdered little Sadie in the first degree. The first degree, the second degree. You got any papers serving on me?" Well, they took me downtown and they dressed me in black. They put me on a train and they sent me back. They sent me back to the Thomasville jail. I had no money to go my bail. Well, the judge and the jury, they took the stand. The judge had the papers in his right hand. He said, 41 days, 41 nights, you got 41 years to wear the ball and stripe. Went out last night and I had a little round. Saw darling Sadie and I shut her down. I went back home and I got into bed. A 44 smoke was laying under my head.
One more as a request to me. All right, so we have one more from Walt. This is there's a guitar, man. I think you got to play some more, man.
Yeah. And I'm playing tomorrow night. People want to come around. Can they come to that? Yeah. free. Yeah. You all know where that is?
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
We want to hear you play it.
I've never sang this at a seminary. This is the right place, I think. I left seminary after a year and a half. You know, the problem was there was this really great coffee house there. And these great musicians came by, and I don't know, Tillich just wasn't working for me. I mean, he was great, don't get me wrong, but it just, you know. I grew up, as Davíd said at the beginning, in a minister's family in Washington, D.C. My father went to Boston. You'll forgive him, right? My father was born upstairs in the farmhouse on the morning of its auction. He was born while the farm was being auctioned off and while the world was changing, 1917. And his father left the farm and became a minister. That farm was built on the land that the Michaels owned for a number of years, called Cooling Springs. You ever been to Harper's Ferry? Harper's Ferry, where John Brown did his thing. Well, this is right near there. Bordering, the Michael land was bordering the Potomac. So as freedom seekers, people, when they hit that north shore of the Potomac, crossing at Point of Rocks, Maryland, they were on Michael land. And they were home free for a while. It was rumored in our family as I grew up that the Spring House was part of the Underground Railroad, although we didn't call it that back then. It was just the way I heard it was there were runaway slaves in the Cooling Springs Spring House, along with Mosby's Rangers. It's right in the middle of all that Civil War craziness. And we never really researched any of it. And, you know, back then, I mean, it's not like they registered you as a stop on the Underground Railroad. It was the kind of stuff that could get you killed, or at least put in jail. In 1974, my great uncle Elmer passed away, and the farm left the family. But in 2000, my cousin Peter Michael, a really great guy, moved back from teaching in Sacramento. And if you'll excuse the expression, he bought the farm. Bought it back into the family. Amazing. The old farmhouse. Beautiful thing. And he started doing research about the farm. And one year, there was a Frederick County Underground Railroad convention where families brought their oral history together and they corroborated each other's stories or didn't corroborate those stories. And in our case, the Spring House was corroborated, and we were an official stop on the Underground Railroad. And oh, I was so proud. You know what they say about pride? It's one of the 7 deadly sins, right? Further back, my cousin Peter went into our history. He found that before the Michaels had been liberators, they had been captors, that they indeed had owned a small family of slaves. And this now becomes my legacy. My legacy. It seems that Ezra married a woman named Dutterer, who was an abolitionist. Looks like she straightened Ezra out, because by the time the Civil War happened, and well before that, we were a stop. But before that, we weren't a stop. We were the stop. This is called Legacy, and it's written by Pierce Pettis, a white man from Florida. It is a legacy, it was passed down to me, a poor dirt farmer, a skinny mule. He parts the red clay like it was the Red Sea. It is a legacy, both me and you. You are a black man, I am a white man. We both come from the Southland. We're doing the best we can. Well, the Grim Reaper was my brother's keeper, the way my brother was kept. Small wonder Jesus wept. It is a legacy passed down to you and me, what we're taught to believe. We never question these things. It is a legacy, a wild and bitter seed blown across these fertile fields where the roots run deep. We both got calloused hands, blue-collared working men here in Bummerland. Oh, what's in a name? We're both working rent to rent, some on the government. We are quite different. We are the same. It is a legacy passed down to you and me, what we learn to believe. We never question these things. It is a legacy, a wild and bitter seed blown across these fertile fields where the roots run deep. Sundays we congregate, we praise Jesus past the plate. We're sitting in our Sunday best, we're singing hymns and mopping sweat. We learn the golden rule in separate Sunday schools, in a house long divided against itself. It is a legacy passed down to you and me, what we choose to believe. We dare not question these things. It is a legacy, a wild and bitter seed blown across these fertile fields where the roots run deep. Where the roots run deep. Thank you all. I'm about sung out, but you know, when I was singing this song, it's really dangerous to stereotype, isn't it? We all know that. We're all in seminary. One of my dearest friends is Leah Gilmore, a wonderful singer, graduate of Morgan State. She's was assistant director of the ACLU in Baltimore. Sings gospel music all over Europe. Toughest town she said she's ever been in is Boston. Toughest town for a black person to be in is Boston, Massachusetts. So as we look to Appalachia, to Mississippi, I was just in Mississippi. Do you know the airport in Mississippi is named after Medgar Evers in Jackson? It doesn't blow your mind. It blew my mind. And I met some wonderful people in Mississippi. We really need to embrace the people who we think we might not need to. We really have to get this done. And I think that's what President Obama was saying to the United Nations yesterday. And I know that you're all on board with that. But I just wish you strength in your work. Thank you.